Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my wide receiver rankings for Week 8. As always, we're intended for half PPR leagues on this channel, but I also start with the players who I didn't rank due to injury. There's no teams on bye, but damn, this weekend we lost a lot of guys, most of them for the season. Chris Godwin out for the year, Brandon Ayuk out for the year, Rashid Shaheed out for the year, Rashee Rice we know was out for the year, same with Marquise Brown, and Mike Evans will be out for a few weeks with a hamstring injury. Jameson Williams got suspended for 2 games. Nico Collins on IR until at least week 10. Juju Smith-Schuster out for at least this game, maybe longer. And Josh Reynolds is out as well. Brandon Cooks on IR for a few more weeks. Adam Thielen, though, might be coming back. His practice window was opened. It's not guaranteed, but he might play. At the moment, I still didn't rank him. Same goes with Puka Nacua, who did open his practice window on Tuesday. The game's on Thursday, though, and it's kind of a toss-up. We'll find out tomorrow if he's actually active. For the moment, not expecting him to play. Did not rank him for this Thursday night game. DK Metcalf, though, I don't think will play. There's a chance he suits up, but a knee injury I think will force him out at least 1 or 2 games. I doubt he's available in Week 8. Quentin Johnston, though, I don't think will play for the second week in a row. Doubtful in my opinion, but questionable on the injury report. Let's get into the ranks, though, with the healthy players. At number 1 and 2, I think it's a toss-up between Ja'Marr Chase and A.J. Brown. They've put up almost identical numbers so far this season. Ja'Marr Chase, the wide receiver 1, with 19.3. He's getting less targets than HIggins, but it's not slowing him down at all. An average of 7.5 targets, 5.8 catches, 104 yards per game, and 4 touchdowns in his last 4. A.J. Brown has been injured this season, only played in 3 full games, but in this sample size, 18 points per game, 8 targets, 5.3 catches, 108 yards per game, and 3 touchdowns. So expect great numbers from them every single week. They're bust-proof, and I do consider them the locks at the top. They're going up against each other, and they'll probably be a back-and-forth battle. That'll be fun to watch. Wide receivers 3 through 7, though, I think are all interchangeable, all in the exact same tier, identical value this week, in my opinion. But personal preference has CeeDee Lamb at number 3 for me. At the Niners, it's not a good matchup. It's actually bottom 2. The Niners have only given up 1 touchdown to the position over the last 5 games. So only 19.2 points per game overall. And there is more risk with this decision. However, CeeDee Lamb was elite last year after the Week 7 bye, after a mediocre start to the season. And it's almost identical what he was putting up on average. In his first 6 games last year, in fantasy points, 12.1 points per game was his average, with 83 yards per game, only 1 touchdown in those first 6 games. If you look at the last 4 games for CeeDee Lamb, he is averaging 12.1 points per game with 82 yards per game and 1 touchdown. CeeDee Lamb has repeated last year's start to the season, and off the bye, if the trend continues, he will be lights out rest of season. He will double this output. He averaged 24 points per game in his last 11 games last year with 13 touchdowns to close it out. I think Lamb will be a lock for a touchdown every single week, as well as at least 120 yards on average rest of year. CeeDee Lamb will compete with Ja'Marr for number 1 overall rest of season. I promise you that. I still believe in CeeDee Lamb. If whoever has him right now disagrees, I think it's the final trade window where you could maybe get him at a slight discount. You're still having to cough up a top 5 receiver to get CeeDee Lamb, but I do think his stock profile will be the highest rest of year. Number 4, I'm going with Cooper Kupp versus the Vikings. And yes, he's coming off of injury, but he did not play on Sunday, and I think they were just resting him up for this Thursday night game, expecting that Nacua probably would not be back in time. So they're taking no chances. I think he'll be active. I'm not worried about it. He should come back from injury. And the last time we saw him on the field in a full game, he had 21 targets, and I think it's going to be similar volume, maybe like 15 in this game. He'll be lights out because the Vikings are also a top 2 matchup over the last 5 games. They've been really vulnerable to the wide receiver position. An average of 38.7 points per game, 17.6 catches per game, 216 yards per game, and 7 touchdowns overall. Cooper Kupp will dominate against the Vikings. At home, short week. They just played the Lions, and because of how physical Detroit is, teams are not quite ready to go the following week. Just look at Tampa Bay. They lost to Denver after they beat Detroit. So the Vikings have a disadvantage this week. I think Kupp has an advantage now that he's healthy. He will play well. They're not going to stop him. The volume will be too high. He's top 5 in my opinion and better than Justin Jefferson in this game. That's the only reason why I think the Vikings do win and Kupp has a better stat line, but Jefferson is a must start every week. Like I mentioned, 3 through 7 are interchangeable. I could put him as high as 3. You probably think I'm too low. I understand. But at number 5, I'm not going crazy. He's still going to be lights out. I'm still expecting 20 plus points from Justin Jefferson. He's averaged 16.2 over his last 4, a touchdown in 3 of those games. He'll be fine. But his volume has been less than 10 targets this season. Similar to CeeDee Lamb, it hasn't been as high as anticipated. Number 6, though, I'm going with Amon-Ra St. Brown versus Tennessee. And with no Jameson Williams, there's 12 targets probably guaranteed for Amon-Ra, but there's also more defensive attention, and L'Jarius Sneed is a legit matchup to be concerned about. So overall, he gets a slight downgrade, but he's still going to be lights out. You could rank him at number 1 or at least at number 3, and I would understand. There's an argument that that is what I should be doing. But the matchups bottom 6, I'll give him a slight downtick in projection, but still with no Jameson Williams, he will be excellent. Jared Goff's on a heater, so you trust St. Brown for sure. He's his best target on the field. Number 7, though, we're welcoming back in Tyreek Hill to the elite status, but because of his track record the last several games without Tua, obviously he's at the bottom. I could envision him, though, being the number 1 wide receiver rest of season if Tua never comes off the field. That's what it's going to take. The ceiling is there. Tyreek's definitely elite, but he has let you down. It's been weird to see him that bad with a backup quarterback. You would expect his talent to be enough to win out most of the time, but he was terrible. I think we're kind of just wiping the slate clean and forgetting about it. I think he's back to elite. What you drafted should be your expectation for Tyreek this week moving forward, as long as Tua is healthy. That's the contingent question mark with this team, and it appears that Tua will be coming back. Number 8, though, we enter a different tier, and Malik Nabers is still a stud, but last week showcased the risk. It just wasn't the same offense. He was getting so much volume to start the season, though. You can't ever bench him. He's definitely a top 10 play, and his rookie season is looking like a potentially historic one if he gets back to what we saw before that Eagles game. It might have just been a divisional matchup that's worth throwing out in the grand scope of things, but I still trust his floor. Against the Steelers, it's not the best matchup, but they're not that scary in the secondary. I think he'll be fine. I still project double-digit targets for Malik Nabers, so trust him. In his last 4, he's averaged 17.8. and I'll keep him in my lineup. As soon as this week, he probably returns to the production we saw before the concussion. Number 9, though, a player that's on the same level would be Drake London. In his last 4 games, averaging 17.1 points per game, and that includes a massive 27-point performance against Tampa Bay in Week 5. That's his opponent this week, Tampa Bay as well. This one is on the road, and last time, I did tell you his home games were way better than the road games. It's 3 straight home games against the Bucs where he gives you at least 120 yards receiving. On the road, though, he is a lot worse. His average stat line is only 7 fantasy points per game, 7 targets, 5 catches, 45 yards per game, no touchdowns, but the change in quarterback, I think, neutralizes any of those fears. He's been so good this year. I think he's earned must-start top 10 status. Drake London has been elite so far. So I trust him. The matchup on paper is really good this year. Top 4 over the last 5 games. They are a good matchup for anyone. So I'm trusting Drake London. I'm not benching him, but maybe the road home splits in this matchup are legit, but that's the only concern to point to. I'm not going to overreact to just one data point when everything else says this guy is a smash. Drake London, top 10, cannot bench him. Number 10, though, I'm going with HIggins versus Philadelphia, and he's been lights out, averaging more targets per game than Ja'Marr Chase this season. In his last 4, 9.8 targets per game, 6.5 catches, 76 yards per game, and 3 touchdowns. In his last 4, 15.3 points per game. HIggins is balling out right now. I think the fact that Ja'Marr Chase was not on the field in practice this offseason means the chemistry in training camp was just so elite between him and Joe Burrow. Even though he missed time weeks 1 and 2, it is paying dividends. HIggins is playing very well. So Burrow trusts him. The matchup against the young Eagles corners doesn't scare me at all. He will continue to play well. Higgins is a top 10 play this week against the Eagles. Another player that's a lock in your lineup who I was tempted to rank top 10, but just couldn't quite fit him in. Brian Thomas versus Green Bay gets a slightly difficult matchup against Jair Alexander, but he's been matchup proof with the exception of that Chicago game, and that's the only concern. Good corners could possibly slow him down, but he comes back home off of the London trip where he was great in his last 4 games, averaging 15.4 points per game with 3 touchdowns, 85 yards per game. He is money down the field. He is printing cash if you drafted him this season. So love Brian Thomas, cannot bench him, but the Jair Alexander matchup is the tiebreaker between him and HIggins for wide receiver 10. Number 12, I'm going with Jayden Reed at the Jags, who gets a great matchup here. Top 3, the Jags can't stop anyone. They've allowed 8 touchdowns to the position over the last 5 games with 172 yards per game, 35.2 points per game overall to opposing wide receivers. So Reed is still their number 1 weapon. The target share is the highest. Romeo Doubs has been creeping up, but Reed also gets some work in the run game. He's the most explosive option they have, and over the last 4 games, he is still averaging 12.3 points. Only 2 touchdowns, but odds are he gets in the end zone this week. I'm still trusting Reed. His ceiling is too high, but maybe he's not a guaranteed top 5 play every week rest of season. Number 13, though, in the same tier, I have DJ Moore at Washington, who didn't score a touchdown in London, but almost connected off the bye. They probably get that right. And against Washington last year, he was amazing. 45 points, 10 targets, 8 catches, 230 yards, 3 touchdowns. He was elite against the Commanders. They had no answers for him. Their secondary has been better. Over the last 5 games, it actually ranks as a bottom 10 matchup after that Panthers game, but on the season, they still rank top 7, so I'm not overreacting, I'm not panicking. I still think this is a upgrade of a matchup where DJ Moore historically goes off. So I kind of feel too low with this ranking, but now he has more mouths to compete with. There's a lot more weapons in this offense. Cole Kmet's also legit, and I think Rome Odunze is due for a big game. Off the bye, rookies usually make a lot of progress typically. So I think only 1 touchdown this time around. He's still a must-start top 15 play. Caleb's going to have a good game this week, and DJ Moore's still their number 1 wide receiver. So start him with confidence. I cannot bench DJ Moore. I'm also not benching Deebo Samuel. I know last week was unfortunate with the pneumonia, but a legit reason to exit the game with illness. It just wasn't his day. So he'll be okay. He's out of the hospital. I expect him to play now. And with no Brandon Ayuk, he's clearly the best option. He had that blow-up game against Seattle, but otherwise not playing too well this season. I still think you have to start him. The upside's too good. He's still their best weapon until McCaffrey comes back. So definitely still starting him and just hoping for the best. With no more Ayuk, the volume will be there every single week. Number 15, I have George Pickens versus the Giants, who looks lights out with Russell Wilson at quarterback. I don't know if it's guaranteed to happen every week, but finally the touchdown hit. That's what was missing with Justin Fields. And we knew his floor was good for 9 points already. So if the touchdown's going to be consistently available every week, Pickens has that 16-point upside that we're looking for. I think Pickens is an excellent play. He went over 100 yards last week and a touchdown. I could see him do that again easily against the Giants. They do not scare me in the secondary, and there's going to be more targets downfield, more of those 50-50 catches. He is really talented. I don't think they can stop him in New York. George Pickens is a must start. Looking like a true alpha with Russell Wilson at QB. Number 16, though, definitely starting Stefon Diggs. You cannot bench him. Nico Collins is still on IR. After Tank Dell put up a bagel last week, you definitely trust Diggs far more. So he's a lock in your lineup, top 20, number 16 for me this week. And he played well against the Colts the first week. He'll probably play well again. You're probably not even benching him when Collins does come back. Diggs has had a very high floor this year. Number 17, though, a bit of a gut call, but I really think Xavier Worthy will dominate because Mahomes is going to have revenge on that Kermit the Frog training camp puppet. Whatever happened, I'm sure he's pissed off about it. So I think this is a perfect opportunity to embarrass your opponent with the fastest man in the NFL. They're going to game plan a lot of deep shots for Worthy. I could see multiple touchdowns for him, and one of them will be a 50-plus yarder. I really think there's a house call in store for Worthy in this game. Mahomes will go ham. So Andy Reid's going to dial up such a good game plan here, a lot of trick plays, and they will showcase their fastest weapon. They traded for Hopkins, so there won't be crazy attention on Worthy. I know the volume is kind of risky to bet on, but we've seen his upside. I could legitimately envision 2 or 3 touchdowns for him this week. I think he's an elite top 20 play. You're going to regret benching Xavier Worthy against Las Vegas. Number 18, I think we're dropping down a tier because this matchup scares the shit out of me. The Chicago Bears with Jalen Johnson as their top cornerback will limit Terry McLaurin. That is for sure. They held Brian Thomas Jr. to less than 30 yards a few weeks ago. So I don't think McLaurin is that much better, especially with the Mariota quarterback concerns. He is not the same option as he has been the last 4 games, where he was averaging 14.8 points per game, 79 yards per game, 3 touchdowns as well. He was Jaden Daniels' clear number 1 target. He will be Mariota's number 1 target, but Jalen Johnson is a big downgrade, and I kind of feel like I'm ranking him too high, even at number 18. But he's been so good lately, you probably think I'm too low and crazy. I get it. Why would I rank Worthy over McLaurin? It's because I respect Jalen Johnson. I could be wrong. That's why I still rank him top 20. I don't think you can bench him, but I do expect a worse performance than what we've gotten from him this year. I don't expect a great game from Terry. The touchdown probably hits, though. As long as Jaden's active, he's top 20. I'll probably bump him down several spots, though, if Mariota is actually the starter. Number 19 and 20, I have back-to-back the Jets, wide receiver 1 and 2. At New England, not a matchup that scares me. But Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams are still vying for that true number 1 receiver. Last week, they both saw 9 targets in their first game together. But Garrett Wilson was far more effective, but he also let a ball bounce off his chest and turn into an interception, one of the reasons why they lost the game. So I still don't think Rodgers trusts him. I think he will inevitably lock on to Devontae Adams for like an entire game and just like only target him. There's going to be one massive Adams game that could happen this week. They've already beaten the Patriots. They might feel comfortable enough to just get him rolling. But Garrett Wilson has played well in his last 4 games. Even without Adams, he is averaging 14.1 points per game. But it's going to be back and forth between the two. The touchdown probably goes to Adams this week, but Garrett Wilson probably looks better on the average target. I have them back-to-back. I think they're equally as valuable. Both players I'm starting. Moving forward, this offense is moving the ball. It is missing a lot of field goals. That's not good, but it doesn't impact fantasy. The touchdowns, though, not hitting very often. So good luck there. One of them might burn you like Adams did last week, but I think you have to start both of them. The upside is too high to ignore. Number 21 and 22, back-to-back, another set of teammates. I have Tyler Lockett and JSN versus the Buffalo Bills, and this is a decent matchup, but it's really just the fact that Metcalf is not available why I'm trusting them. There are 9.3 targets per game available here, and while half of them might go to Noah Fant, I think the floor is very high with Lockett and JSN, pretty bust-proof against the Bills. You know they're going to have to throw it a lot. They've already been getting decent targets already, and I do think I prefer Lockett straight up. I know JSN has seen more targets, but he's not been better. He's more of a check down machine, whereas Lockett is better down the field. They both have 1 touchdown over the last 4 games, and Lockett is averaging 9.8 points per game. JSN only 7.6. So both of them probably see 10 targets this week, and that's why I think they're must starts. But I think if I'm betting on one, I'm betting on the guy who has looked better and more consistent this season. That would be Tyler Lockett. But I think JSN is on par with him. They're identical, and the touchdown is kind of a coin flip who it will go to. There's only one I trust. So one of them will not be as good as this rank, but the other will definitely live up to it, and you can kind of pick your poison. For me, I'd rather go Tyler Lockett. Number 23, though, still a player you're starting. You kind of have to. It's Chris Olave at the Chargers, who is still questionable, might miss another game with that concussion, but that's unlikely. I don't expect that to happen. However, he hasn't been great over his last 4 games, only 10 points per game. This is also a very bad matchup. The Chargers just held Marvin Harrison in check, and they do rank bottom 4 over the last 5 games, only giving up 20.5 points per game to the position. League average is about 27. So not ideal. The touchdown probably happens. They've allowed 5 over the last 5 weeks, but only 106 yards. His efficiency probably is not his best on the season. So I'm expecting a ton of volume here, only if Derek Carr plays, though. If Carr doesn't play, I'll be bumping him down significantly, and I would be panicking on Olave in that scenario. But I'm expecting Carr to be active, so he's still a good flex play. We'll see what happens, but the Chargers are a legit matchup. He doesn't gain that much value just because Shaheed is no longer on the field. Number 24, risky proposition with Zay Flowers lately, but still a guy I think you have to start. He either gives you like 10 plus targets or less than 30 yards. So very boom bust, a lot of risk, but I don't expect him to be that bad that many weeks in a row. And at some point he will return to the alpha. The problem though is that he's not scoring touchdowns. He doesn't have a single touchdown in the last 4 games. And this offense beats you on the ground most of the time. Rashod Bateman has stepped up. Mark Andrews appears to be back. I'm not convinced he scores more than 4 touchdowns on the season. So he's almost halfway through it with only 1 touchdown on the season. I would worry a little bit with Zay Flowers, but the volume usually is there, and he still is giving you 74 yards per game over the last 4 games. That's a pretty decent floor. So if the touchdown does hit, you'll be ecstatic about it, and he could easily see like 12 targets, 100 yards. I think he will be needed in this game against the Browns. So give me Zay Flowers still as a top 25 receiver, but I understand if you think this rank is too high. At 25, though, a player who's earned your trust would be Darnell Mooney at Tampa Bay. He almost had that second touchdown, if not for a drop, against Tampa back in week 5. So another matchup against them, I'm definitely buying into it once more. And on paper, it does rank as a top 4 spot to be in. They are terrible at defending wide receivers this year. So definitely love that for Mooney, who's been very involved, more consistent targets than Kyle Pitts this season, 8.8 per game over the last 4. So I'm trusting his floor. He also has 2 touchdowns, 61 yards per game, 11.6 points per game, is honestly top 20 at the position. So I could rank him higher, but he's more in the flex conversation. He's still just the number 2 target, and in division without the wide receivers, their defense for the Bucs should probably step up. So I do think it could be more of a lower scoring game, but last time we saw Kirk Cousins throw for 500, I wouldn't bet against Mooney. I'd still start him against the Bucs. Number 26, I have DeVonta Smith, another number 2 receiver at the Bengals this time, and DeVonta is not as consistently involved as last season. The Kellen Moore offense with Saquon Barkley just not using him like crazy. Last week it was mainly just the Saquon Barkley fixation that I think left him high and dry, but he'll probably get back in the end zone sooner or later, so he's still a decent start, but I do worry about his usage. Last 2 games, he's maxed out at 4 targets, and you don't love to see that. So he's touchdown dependent, but he's still really talented. He's lost some value, but I still think you're starting him at number 26. He's a very high-end flex play that I kind of feel too low ranking here. He's averaged 10.7 points the last 4 games, and if the touchdown hits, he'll probably give you at least 15. So let's hope that happens. It should, but the risk has creeped up a little bit lately in this offense. With A.J. Brown healthy, it's not quite the same value that we saw when A.J. Brown was off the field. Number 27, I have Amari Cooper, who just got traded to Buffalo last week and did score a touchdown, but didn't have more targets than either Shakir or Keon Coleman. They both had 7. Cooper had 5, but he did find the end zone. He scored 14.6 points on only 5 targets, 4 catches, 66 yards. Really solid game. I think he will emerge as their top target, but it might take a few games. He's still getting a bit acclimated, and Devon Witherspoon is not the best matchup, but I still prefer him most of all in this offense. I think he is the wide receiver to trust more often than the others, and while he does gain a lot of value, he had lost a lot with Cleveland this year. I basically see him identically to how I perceived him entering the season, which was a weekly top 30 wide receiver. He'd be somewhere between wide receiver 20 and 30 any given week, and this week I have him at 27. I'm still going to start him, but against Witherspoon, I don't think he goes over 100 yards for the second week in a row. Number 28, another player that just got traded. This time, it's DeAndre Hopkins, who now is a Chief. Perfect landing spot for him. He hit the jackpot because there's so much volume available and they need weapons. Juju Smith-Schuster looked great for them before the bye, before he got hurt. So Hopkins can slide right in. I could see legitimately 10 plus targets this week for Hopkins, but in his first game back, they probably don't have the full playbook available for him. But I do think Mahomes will make this work. I think if you held strong with Hopkins through the early games, you are ecstatic. He vaults up the rankings, and if I wasn't projecting an elite game for Xavier Worthy, I'd probably rank DeAndre Hopkins top 20. I really think he could be that valuable rest of season. He will be a stud for Mahomes. He's still great. He was better than Ridley the last month in Tennessee, and just like Amari Cooper, he probably scores that welcome to town touchdown. I think in his first game with the Chiefs, he will find the end zone. He will go off against the Raiders. I want him in my lineup. I also want Rome Odunze in my lineup this week. A bit of a gut call, but I really think there's massive upside for Rome this week. Against the Commanders, it's not a defense that scares you at all. And before the bye in London, Keenan Allen scored 2 touchdowns. He hadn't had a big game before that. So now the pressure is off Caleb to get Keenan established in the offense. And we've seen Rome have an excellent game in the past. It happened, I believe, week 3. He was lights out. And it could happen again with over 100 yards and a touchdown. This is definitely a matchup where it could happen. We also know that off the bye, teams usually make a lot of progress with their rookie wide receivers. They usually get involved a lot more after the bye, especially in the first week back. So I think they will game plan a touchdown for Rome. I think he will go off. I see massive upside. If DJ Moore doesn't go off, it will be someone else, and I think this week it's more likely to be Rome Odunze than Keenan Allen. Cole Kmet scares me a little bit, but Odunze is due, and I think this is his week. The Commanders will not be able to stop the top 10 overall pick in this game. Start him this week. I think he's a top 30 play. I really believe Rome Odunze is going off. Number 30, another top 10 rookie wide receiver overall pick. Marvin Harrison Jr. at the Dolphins, who was bad last week again. He's been kind of touchdown dependent, only 2 games this season with over 50 yards. And this week he draws a terrible matchup, the worst on the board. The Dolphins only give up 17 points per game to opposing wide receivers. 8.6 catches per game, 110 yards per game, only 1 touchdown over the last 5 games. So I do not think Marvin goes off against Jalen Ramsey. I think he will be limited. He was limited last week in a bad matchup, and the Chargers are not as good in the secondary as the Dolphins are. So he can be limited. He can be taken out of the game, and I've seen not enough from him to really trust him in these tough spots. So I think he will have a bad game. I could talk myself into benching him outright, but he still has a lot of upside. He probably finds the end zone and bails you out. I still trust Kyler to get him the ball enough to offer a decent floor. So at number 30, I think he's fine, but I'd rather go with Rome this week. I think there's way more upside for Odunze than there is for Harrison. Number 31, I'm still going back to Tank Dell, but damn, he was so disappointing last week. That bagel cost me a very valuable win in my PPR league. I lost by 4 points with a Tank Dell bagel. So I'm really pissed. I wanted to rank him way lower, but I can't just like completely overreact. He's still in a really good situation. CJ Stroud is his quarterback, who should bounce back after a really down game against the Packers. And he also had some red zone targets last week. It's not like Tank Dell didn't see any volume. He just didn't come down with any catches. So at some point, he'll play better, but he's played really bad this season, an average of 5.6 points per game in his last 4 games. He's not been good. I need to take an L on the endorsement I gave you on Tank Dell back in the offseason. It just has not paid off. A bagel is inexcusable. And when Nico Collins comes back, I think he'll be ranked outside the top 40. I really don't trust Tank Dell at all. You're just hoping for a touchdown, and the volume probably comes back for like 7-8 targets with no Nico Collins in this game against the Colts. He should be okay. Number 32, though, I'm going with Romeo Doubs at Jacksonville, who gets an elite top 3 matchup. The Jags cannot stop anyone, and Doubs has been pretty good over the last 4 games. He's clearly the number 2 receiver in this offense. Last week he had 10 targets, but he's averaging 10 points per game in his last 4, 6 targets per game, 4 catches, 50 yards per game, 2 touchdowns. That's the same target volume and touchdown production as Jayden Reed in the same sample size. So Doubs has been pretty legit. He's involved in this offense, and we know that Jordan Love has a good friendship with him. They are buddies. So I do trust him in a good matchup. I think there is room for another Packers receiver to play well, and my bet would be that Doubs is the safest to bet on beyond Jayden Reed. I prefer him over Watson and Wicks. I think he'll be consistent in terms of floor. Rest of season, he has the least bust potential of everyone not named Jayden Reed. At 33, though, I need to give some credit to Rashod Bateman. I have not been ranking him, and he's actually been very good the last 4 games, an average of 11.5 points per game. He is connecting on all those deep targets. He's not getting a lot of targets, only 4.5 targets per game, but 3.3 catches for 68 yards is hyper efficient, really valuable numbers. With 2 touchdowns, he has a very high ceiling. He could give you 20 points in any given week. He's actually been better than Zay Flowers, 11.5 points for Bateman, only 9.6 for Flowers the last 4 games. So he's pretty legit. I don't want to dismiss him. And I think at this point, the risk has factored into the equation for everyone. Bateman is a legit swing for the fence. You also have the excuse to have to watch the Ravens game, which is always a good spot to be in. So really fun player to bet on, and Lamar has been shown up for you lately. I do think it could happen again. Bateman has that deep target appeal that this offense was missing in the past. So love it for him if it continues, but maybe it dries up. It's not the safest bet, but you can say that about anyone going forward. Same applies with Jordan Addison, who's also a deep threat touchdown dependent option. He has very high upside, but he could also burn you. You wouldn't be shocked if you got like less than 20 yards from Addison any given matchup. So against the Rams, it's not ideal, but he has averaged 9 points per game over the last month. With 2 touchdowns, he's not the worst bet either. He's getting involved, and Darnold usually chucks it deep to him at least 1 or 2 times a game. So he had a massive catch last week for over 50 yards. That's what you're hoping for. Number 35, another high boom bust option would be Jaylen Waddle, and his speed always keeps him in play. He could take it to the house as well, but he's played so badly the last 4 games without Tua. I just don't trust him. I have a hard time, without having seen it in over a month, endorsing Waddle any higher than 35, but he's still in the flex conversation. I think you could rank him as high as 26, just as high as DeVonta Smith. There is plenty of appeal, but I kind of want to see it with him. I'm ready to buy into Tyreek Hill, but to buy into both immediately kind of feels misguided. So maybe I'm just too skeptical. Maybe you're more confident in Waddle than I am, but at 35, I still think he's an interesting flex play, just offers kind of a lot of risk with limited volume, just like Bateman and Addison. You're hoping for the touchdown. Number 36, though, the last player I'm willing to start with confidence in my flex spot would be Jalen McMillan versus Atlanta. The rookie wide receiver needs to step up with no Mike Evans or Chris Godwin. Last week, he saw 8 targets. He only has 15 targets on the season, but I expect that volume to continue for the 2nd week in a row. With no Mike Evans or Godwin, he is clearly their number 1 wide receiver, and it's just him and Cade Otton. Those are the only weapons for Baker that really offer some upside and hype. So McMillan will get involved. Baker's going to chuck it, and maybe there's some garbage time available here. I think he will have a decent stat line when it's all said and done, but maybe the touchdown does not hit. However, the Falcons are a top 5 matchup. It's not like you're worried about it. I could see Baker tear them up and still win this game without his top 2 weapons. McMillan could find the end zone easily, even multiple times. So a lot of upside here. The volume should be there. The floor is decent. I kind of feel too low on McMillan. I could also rank him as high as DeVonta Smith. Just like Waddle, all these 11 receivers, 26 through 36, are all kind of in the same tier for me as well. Moving forward, though, I think we're in the risky flex territory. I think now it's very touchdown dependent, and they're kind of in some crowded, ambiguous situations. It's not the safest bet, but there's still a lot of value with Khalil Shakir and Keon Coleman. I have them back-to-back here. at Seattle. And last week, both had more targets than Amari Cooper. So maybe I'm ranking them incorrectly. Maybe they're actually the better, safer plays, but I still think Cooper will be the alpha rest of season. So one of these guys can step up. There's always plenty of touchdown production in this offense to go around, but betting on both of them is kind of misguided. Last week, it was Coleman who had the better game. He had 125 yards on 4 catches with a touchdown. Meanwhile, Shakir had the same 7 target volume, but only 7 for 65. He was more of a check down guy for Josh Allen. So I trust the floor with Shakir, but Coleman has the higher upside. However, those roles could pivot any given week, and it's really just how lucky do you feel. But the upside is too high to ignore. So I understand if you would rather start them than Tank Dell this week. It's not the worst decision, and inside the top 40, they are legit flex plays, even at this stage in the rankings. Number 39, I got Jerry Jeudy versus Baltimore, who I do think is the guy they want to be the number 1 receiver. They paid him the most this offseason, but last week it was Cedric Tillman. Jeudy was kind of an afterthought. However, they also went to DTR instead of Jameis Winston. So things will look different with Jameis this week and a full week in practice as the starter. I think the offense will be better, and Jeudy will get the game plan to favor him. I'm not quite sure he'll actually pay off. He's never actually played well in his career, but the matchup is great. The Ravens are actually the best matchup you could get, and someone will play well beyond Njoku in this offense. So I kind of feel way too low on Jeudy, but he did not overtake Tillman last week. It does offer a bit of risk. It could be a Tillman game once again. So I still think Judy's the guy you want, but I'm not totally convinced that is accurate to predict, and that's why I only have him at 39. He does offer a bit more risk than I would like to endorse. Number 40, I have Courtland Sutton versus Carolina, who put up a bagel last week. We saw the massive risk he offers, but he has been somewhat decent. He has scored 2 touchdowns in his last 4 games, and he probably bounces back. I think Bo Nix will look a lot better against the Panthers secondary than the Saints secondary. The Saints are terrible against the run, really good against the pass, and they had caught like 10 interceptions going into that game. So Sean Payton protected Bo Nix, and he didn't turn it over. They won the game. I think Sutton will get back on track, probably find the end zone, but without it, you will get burned. He's not giving you more than 50 yards most of the time. So no thank you. I don't think the touchdown really moves the needle enough. I still worry he goes over 10 points, and after last week, the risk is too high. No thanks with Sutton, but at number 40, the matchup's good. Odds are he gets closer to 10 than 0. Number 41, though, I'm going with Calvin Ridley at Detroit, who you would think is more valuable with no more DeAndre Hopkins, but I'm not convinced that's the case. He's been so bad the last 4 games, only averaging 2.5 points with no touchdowns, less than 20 yards per game. He's been brutal in this offense. The matchup is top 7. The Lions don't give up a lot of touchdowns to the position, but usually 200 yards to wide receivers per game. So Ridley could capitalize. He should be okay. However, I want to see it before I trust it. So this good matchup is kind of wasted on him. If he had been traded to the Chiefs, I'd be ranking him top 20, but that didn't happen. Hopkins gains a lot of value. Ridley doesn't gain that much more, but his floor feels a bit safer now that Hopkins is gone. Number 42, I have Michael Pittman at Houston, who does not have a floor with Richardson at quarterback. He's averaged 5.5 points per game with Richardson this season, so not good, really hard to trust. But against the Dolphins last week, it was a terrible matchup, and he could easily bounce back in a top 10 matchup against the Texans. He wasn't great in week 1 against them, though, so I find it hard to trust. They have given up 8 touchdowns to the position, though, and it is possible that Pittman does finally pay off. But if anyone's going to hit in this offense, it's probably the deep touchdown with Richardson, and it hasn't gone to Pittman this year. It's gone to Alec Pierce instead. So that's very frustrating. He feels very hard to feel good about in your lineup without Joe Flacco. Number 43 is not a safe bet to actually play, but I have Jauan Jennings here versus Dallas, and if he plays, I'm probably going to rank him much higher, but I would prioritize him off the waiver wire. I think he's very valuable rest of season. With no more Ayuk, he's the front runner to be their number 2 target at receiver rest of year, but he's dealing with a hip injury. He did not play last week. He might not play this week, and it does open the door for those rookies to step up. So maybe he loses value if they actually play well, but I think if he plays, he's going to be a very good start this week. I'd bump him up inside the top 35. I think he'd be way more valuable if I knew for a fact he was starting. But he could burn you if you wait for him and he's ruled inactive at kickoff. I think Jauan Jennings is not the safest bet on Sunday Night Football. You would rather have a backup plan at this point in time. But if he practices this week, I would start him. He would be moving up the ranks for sure. Number 44 in the same game, I have Jalen Tolbert at the Niners, who gets a terrible matchup. On paper, the Niners are bottom 2 against the wide receiver position, and this feels much more like a CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson game than Tolbert to go off. So you're really hoping for a touchdown. That's what he needs. And while he has been decent in his last 4 games, averaging 10 points per game, I don't think this is the week to bet on him. But last season, the offense really clicked after the bye. Brandon Cooks had 7 touchdowns in the final 11 games. It could easily happen for Tolbert, who does have 2 touchdowns so far this season. He's not a bad depth piece, but this week, I'd rather bench him. Number 45, I'm definitely benching Diontae Johnson this week at Denver against Patrick Surtain as the offense is starting to fall apart again. No thank you at all, especially if Thielen is active. I would be worried about the volume for Diontae, and I'm not convinced he's fully healthy. He has been struggling the last 2 weeks. So Diontae in a terrible matchup, I'm not going to risk it. Definitely benching him. There's way more appealing options than the Panthers wide receiver 1. Number 46, I'm also benching the Raiders wide receiver 1, Jakobi Meyers. He might not play. He's missed the last 2 games, but if he does, he probably gets like 8 targets if active. Against the Chiefs, though, Trent McDuffie will lock him up. I don't think it's just the Mahomes revenge game. I think the Chiefs also want revenge. The last time this team lost was to Aiden O'Connell back on Christmas. So they will get the win here comfortably, and I think they go off, really limit the Raiders offense. With Minshew at quarterback, I don't really care. Myers is not safe against the Chiefs defense. So he's going to suck. It's a terrible matchup, and they will hold him in check. He might get like 4 catches for 30 yards, but I really don't trust anything more than that from Myers this week. At 47, I don't trust Demario Douglas either against the Jets. He's also questionable to play. He did come out with an injury last week, but Drake May does offer some upside. He's still their number 1 receiver. If healthy, he's the most valuable, but against the Jets, I'm not going to trust him. Not this week. Not in a bad matchup like this. Number 48, I have Ladd McConkey versus New Orleans, who also gets a terrible matchup against Marshawn Lattimore, but is the number 1 target at receiver for this team. So still someone I got to rank top 50. However, last week he wasn't even as good as Josh Palmer on more volume, and he's not 100% healthy. So without Quentin Johnston, it also doesn't really help him. There's more attention on him, and he will get open, but I don't think he'll get open in the red zone, and that's what's critical. Without a touchdown, I don't see much value for McConkey. Just a floor play for about 7-8 points. That's about it. Number 49 and 50, though, I have the rookie wide receivers in San Francisco, Jacob Coing and Ricky Pearsall, who will be stepping up with no Ayuk. They'll definitely do that. And if Jauan Jennings isn't healthy either, they'll be ranked much higher, probably on par with like Shakir and Coleman. However, personally, I prefer Jacob Coing. In the short term, I think he has more chemistry with Brock Purdy. He's had way more time in practice dating back to when they were drafted. He's been far healthier this offseason. And Pearsall, while he appears to be healthy, he is the first overall draft pick, I do think is just not quite up to speed on the same level as Coing. So Coing is very fast. I think he does have some upside, and he did have more yards last week on less volume. So I think we'll see a similar situation happen this week. They're both kind of identical, but the touchdown is random. Not convinced I know where it will go. And if you're willing to bet on it, one of them probably pays off, the other one burns you. So good luck here, but at 49.50, they're not the worst bets to make. I would have some appeal for them off of the waiver wire, at least as a depth piece on my bench. Number 51, though, just like Ladd McConkey, Josh Palmer is just a floor play. Did have a decent game last week, is kind of the healthiest wide receiver they have at the moment, but still not that high upside. Rough spot against the Saints. Number 52, I have Wan'Dale Robinson at Pittsburgh, who in full PPR would be ranked a lot higher, but last week he had 6 catches, only 23 yards, and this offense is not one you trust. With Nabers back, the upside is just capped. He's not going to score touchdowns. I don't trust Daniel Jones. No thanks with Wan'Dale. Against the Steelers, not going to be his best game, but he probably moves back inside the top 40 pretty soon. Number 53, I have Tutu Atwell versus Minnesota. And if Puka is still out, then someone else needs to step up. So my pick would be Tutu. However, it's kind of a gamble with him, Whittington, and Demarcus Robinson. Good luck there. Number 54 is Cedric Tillman, who had 12 targets last week, but I still think they would prefer those go to Judy. So I'm not fully ready to endorse him, but it's possible I'm way too low. Tillman could be the guy for Jameis Winston. The Browns definitely need someone other than Njoku to step up. At 55, I have Allen Lazard, who's still somewhat involved, had 4 targets last week, 4 catches, 58 yards with Adams on the field, but now he's competing for the 4th option, not the 3rd. Lazard is not as safe, but still relevant in terms of upside. He probably catches a touchdown another 4 or 5 times this season. Number 56, I have Keenan Allen at Washington, and coming off 2 touchdowns in that London game, I think this is more of a roam spot. I think Keenan will kind of take a back seat and let the rookie thrive. Off the bye, I think that's more likely. Number 57 and 58 is Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks, and if you're betting on a 3rd Packers receiver, you really need that luck on your side. The touchdown is critical, and it could go to either player. Wicks has actually scored 3 touchdowns in his last 4 games. Watson only 1. Maybe this week it pivots back to Watson. 59, I have Alec Pierce, who could cash that deep touchdown. That's what you're hoping for, but without it, you'll get burned, so good luck with that. And then last player ranked would be Khalif Raymond versus the Titans. He will be the next man up with no Jameson Williams. He scored a touchdown last week. It might pivot to Tim Patrick, but odds are it just goes to Sam Laporta. I'm ranking him, but I'm not ready to start him. That feels a little too risky. But Goff has looked great. Against the Titans, it's possible Raymond plays well. That's it for my rankings, though. These are the top 60 on the screen here, and the lines indicate the tiers. I think the top 2 are set in stone, but 3 through 7 are interchangeable, and honestly are in the same category as the top 2. There's a world where any of those guys have the best score on the week, but I do trust all of them in the top 7 to go over 20 points. I trust the top 17 this week to go over 16. I think even Xavier Worthy is going to have an excellent game this week. At least 15, 16 points feels like a very safe bet for wide receivers 8 through 17. But wide receivers 18 through 25, I think, are very legit wide receiver 2s as well. They're kind of in the high-end flex conversation, but I trust the floor. The matchup for guys like Terry McLaurin is not good, neither for Chris Olave, but the Jets receivers feel like must-starts. Same with the Seahawks receivers without DK Metcalf, and Flowers and Mooney have earned enough trust, I think, to remain locks in your lineup. So I'm projecting at least 12+ points for all of them. They should remain in your lineup. Starting with wide receiver 26, though, through 36, I think they're all kind of interchangeable as well, and I'm trusting my gut on players like Amari Cooper, DeAndre Hopkins, Rome Odunze, and Tank Dell. I think they will pay off this week. So I do want to start them, but you can pivot to running back. Running back is very deep this week, and the flex decisions will be very close in week 8. So good luck to you, but I think starting with Khalil Shakir, there's a little too much risk for me to feel great about it. I think that's where you start to bench players. Less than 10 points would be my projection. However, starting with Diontae Johnson, that's where I'm definitely benching those guys. Less appeal for sure, starting with 45 through 52. And then 53 through 60 are just dart throws. You're really just praying for a touchdown. If they go off, it's because someone we really count on ranked above them in the top 30 gets vultured and does not score that touchdown. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. But that's it for me. My name is Adam Riancho. I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.